Welcome to the CNBC Africa debate, where we focus on education as a key enabler for industrialization. I'm joined to my immediate right by Mathanzima Mweli, Acting Deputy Director General, Curriculum and Policy at the Department of Basic Education. Miriam Altman, who is Commissioner for the National Planning Commission. Veronica Hofmeester, who is the Vice President for Education at the South African Democratic Teachers Union, otherwise known as SADTU. Dr. Raymond Patel, who is the CEO of merSETA, and Sonwabile Ndamase, who's Executive President of the Fashion Designers Agency, South Africa. Thank you all very much for joining me. Well, the stage has been set by Rian Yonk, the CEO of Pearson, and certainly by Mr. Godongwana, who has asked the tough questions. So, Raymond, I've got to go to the opening question here. So, Enoch says he's going to close you down. Manufacturing, engineering, related services, SETA. How do you feel about that comment? Let's give you a right to respond right off the top.
I'm so sorry he's left, but I think it's rather premature to make such calls. Now, I must agree with him that 13 years of SETA life, that we can't really boast that SETAs have performed adequately within the economy, but not all SETAs. The judge or the judgment towards a qualification, audit qualification, is not enough. One is to look at the impact. I do work for a SETA that has shown quite a bit of impact. He speaks of training more learners. I call it above the equilibrium training program. And we've trained more learners than we should. And we did that in collaboration with business. You cannot, therefore, the term collaboration this morning is very important. The partnership agreements that one should have with business in terms of training and responding to the economy is very important. Where SETAs have failed, we should understand it was shortcuts, and mostly taken by business. Getting cheap labor in, through a learnership program. We need to train people that are relevant for the economy. And people would add value to the economy. I can give you statistics. We've done quite a bit of research with the HSRC, we've done with Bronwyn University, that 85% of people who are trained to the merSETA programs get employment immediately. There's about 1% of training through our apprenticeship program called the Accelerated Artisan Training Program that are not employed currently. The greatest movement of people is between Limpopo and Mpumalanga.
So you believe that
yes.
the SETA system is working and it is delivering results?
What I need to say, we need to review the system. I must say this very categorically, and I might be unpopular amongst my colleagues. 21 SETAs is just too much for a small economy like South Africa. We need to relook at that system first. We probably have to look at how Stats South Africa breaks up the economy into its different categories and demarcate SETAs into those categories. And I think, yes, I agree that SETA review system is needed.
Deputy Director General, let's talk about the stats here, again tabled by Enoch. 7 million South Africans unemployed in the country. Of that, 2.4 million fall between the ages of 20 and 25, and we have got 750,000 between the ages of 15 and 19. The statement made that we need to revamp vocational training in the country. Let's get your thoughts on how we can positively impact that unemployment number among South Africa's youth.
Well, thank you very much. Our role as basic education is to create a solid foundation for knowledge and skills for these learners post-matric to be able to pursue careers in areas of need in the country. And what I want to say is that acknowledging that our education system has been developing and has been improving, I mean, performance of education systems in the world are judged on 5 principles. It's access, equity, redress, quality, and efficiency. We've made progress in 3. We've now acknowledged that what we need to improve is quality and efficiency. And part of what is contained in the efficiency is the number of learners who stay in the schooling system. I want to suspect that part of the 750,000 could be accounted for in terms of learners who drop out of the system because some of them are unable to cope with the cognitive demand of the curriculum. We are now creating a a version of the curriculum that will even make provision for those learners who are unable to cope with the curriculum that is of high cognitive demand, which is more academic than even vocational and occupational. And that work we are doing with Lucy and SAQA.
Miriam, I'd like to get you to weigh in at this point. Obviously, your thinking has been critical in the framework for the industrialization of South Africa through the National Development Plan, and your view on how education is an underpin to that industrialization.
Okay. As a backdrop, if you think about the South African economy, just as a set of principles for our debate, we are a middle income economy, which means that we can't compete on cost. Having said that, we're only middle income in name and in number, but not in the experience. So in other words, most people actually live as though they're living in a poor economy, and they aren't achieving the kind of standard of education that is going to fuel the economy, much less raise living standards. And in a middle income economy, it's absolutely essential that we achieve that. The second thing is that we're a resource-based economy, so our trade profile is dominated by metals and minerals still. That distorts the economy and deeply affects our industrialization process, makes it very difficult, but equally there are huge opportunities in inputs industries and a whole range of downstream industries. The third thing is that we are actually a services economy. And while people think that those things are contradictory, actually it's very common for minerals economies like ours to largely be creating employment and services. And in fact, that is happening in every economy, including China. So we can expect the vast majority of jobs, 70 to 90% of any new jobs that get created, to be in the services sector. From an industrial, and that's true globally, that's not just true of South Africa. Now, so the upshot of that is that we should be promoting services sectors in our trade profile. We should be, as Korea, Malaysia, India, Indonesia, Turkey, many countries are in construction, retail, engineering, and IT-enabled services. India created 2 million jobs and created huge diversification in its IT-enabled services over only a decade, between 2000 and 2010. So that's a kind of model that we need to start following. Now, it's a very simple point that needs to be made for the education system, which is that we don't know exactly what people will be doing. Enoch raised the point that we need to have an oversupply. That is so true. We undersupply. We need to raise the probability of success of people, no matter what their socioeconomic class is, of accessing a high-quality education, which provides them communication skills, math, comprehension, e-enablement. It's a very basic message, but the reality is that only a minority of South Africans ever get anywhere near that, and it's not something that's going to fuel a middle-income country. We're going to be stuck.
Veronica, let's get you in now as a representative, obviously, of the largest teachers' union in South Africa. You've got about 250,000 members. Yeah. Enoch's going to be quoted over and over again in this discussion because he laid the groundwork for a controversial discussion. Education, more and more is being spent on education, but we're seeing less and less, let's use the term return on investment. He made the point that 90% of what is being spent on education is going into salaries. I'd like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, let me go to the schooling system where what the previous speaker was talking about, and I want to focus on skills and the labor market and what is supposed to happen in basic education, because I want to go there. I want to go to skills that learners can acquire that can assist them in the post-schooling system, and I think sometimes one neglect what is supposed to happen in the foundation phase classrooms, in the intermediate phase classrooms, in the senior phase classrooms at ordinary schools that must assist skills. Let me take you to the foundation phase, for example, to cite a simple one. In an ECD class, learners have the opportunity to acquire a skill in collecting whatever they need to collect with regards to a topic. They must be able to sort, they must be able to analyze, they must be able to describe, they must be able to write. It's a skill that is needed in a post-schooling system. And sometimes most of the time you have teachers in the system that is trained to be generalist and not specialist. And because you are a generalist, you do a lot of things, but you don't specialize and observe the skill that a learner has. Across grades, across phases, this specific skill that identify in the elementary school, in the ECD class, must be strengthened. So teachers need to understand what the skills are, how they must strengthen the skill. Sometimes it's late to look at skills as they are in the post-schooling system. We have to catch the learners when they are in basic education to do things right. We must lay the basis correctly. We have a curriculum that give us the opportunity, teaches the opportunity to do that. But if I'm not properly skilled to deal with the curriculum, I will not be able to do that. So the curriculum is there, but the competency of teachers to deal with those things is lacking.
Sonwabile, let's bring you in from the fashion design environment in South Africa and what you're seeing from an education perspective, vocational training specifically in this sector.
There is a lot actually that is being done by the institutions of learning, which we have captured because I run an institution and also I run a production company where then we create a workplace for some of the learners that come from the institutions of learning. And also we are an accredited institution by one of the SADTUs. But then what we have picked up on the business aspect of things is that some of the learners that we do get from part of the industry, part of the institutions, they are not yet ready for the industry, of which then this is an industry that we believe it has got labor intensive, that creates a lot of jobs for a country like ours, which is a developing country. We know that quite a number of factories have closed down. And now what we are trying to find out is that those kind of skills, practical skills that have been there, where people have been working into those factories that have been closed, what happened to them? Because we've got in this country a lot of what we call scarce skills, tailoring and all other skills that actually could help in making the point that manufacturing industries, they start growing. But now we are seeing a lot of decline in terms of the manufacturing, meaning that there is a lot of education and other people coming into the space, not as industrialists, but coming in as entrepreneurs. And now we need to close the gap between that entrepreneur and industrialist so that when one is looking at an industrialist, so you are looking at a bigger scope because you are seeing a very big space that is going to employ quite a number of people.
I want to borrow again from the CEO of Pearson, Rian Jonk, who said it's all about collaboration. He said that the private sector must not wait for the government to move on education. And this brings to mind the National Education Collaboration Trust, which has recently been put into action to help execute on the education objectives within the National Development Plan. This obviously is a movement between Labour, government, business and civil society. Your thoughts, Deputy Director General?
No, that's absolutely correct. We established the National Education Collaboration Trust about a year ago, going to 2 years, because we realized that in meeting the objectives that are encapsulated in the National Development Plan, in planning frameworks of government and so on, education department on its own will not be able to do that. And I can indicate that the establishment of the NECT has already brought quite a lot of achievements. One of those is its ability to bring all the role players together. Civil society, we always say education is a societal matter. Social partners, business to invest in education, but business also to make meaningful inputs in terms of skills and knowledge that is required by the country for business to run. In fact, what we constantly say is that business should be able to continue to create more employment because they are the largest employer in any country. And I think the NECT has really succeeded, not only in bringing business with government and other role players in civil society together, but also being able to afford an opportunity for business to make a meaningful investment in education.
Miriam, collaboration, the silver bullet when it comes to solving the issues that we're dealing with as a country in terms of education?
Yeah, I think it's the only way, and collaboration not just with business but with civil society. It's something we're discussing in the National Planning Commission right now, is how do you mobilize communities to get more involved in schools? If there's one thing that will improve accountability in schools, it's the wrath of parents, if I can say, and parents generally in South Africa in many communities aren't involved. So that's a very important missing link right now, and that includes all the community colleges, the FETs, the schools, and then of course the partnership with business in terms of getting the right curricula, getting the numbers, getting the funding flows. I hate to say, in terms of the SEDAs, I'm at Telkom, and money doesn't flow. We pay, but it doesn't come through, so we train, but the system doesn't work easily.
Raymond, you've got to follow on from Miriam's comments.
I think what one is to do there, in response to Miriam, is that the SADTU system is too bureaucratic and is very structured. One of the things we do is to break down the bureaucracy. We simply see it as government in business. Now, sorry Miriam, you're not with merSETA. Telkom is not with merSETA. But with us, we've paid out last year 96% of our levy in terms of mandatory grants and discretionary grants. We had 4% as a surplus that got rolled over. But getting back to the whole collaboration, one is to understand that SADTU makeup and setup was really based on two imperatives. The one is a social imperative, and the second is an economic imperative. The economic imperative is really to get business productive, increase profitability, create jobs, and so on. But the social imperative is so important, and that partnership, just to link on. We sit with people, if you look at, and Enoch mentioned that, if you look at the bottom sector of our economy, the ordinary people, the working people, that particular grouping, as 96% of workers are black and elementary trained. And then you take the top echelons, your management cluster, at 17% black and 16.5% women. And if you break it down further, 4.3% women, black women. So you've got some serious training to do. And I think that collaboration cannot happen without looking at that social imperative. That's training the unemployed, training black. You can't apologize for that, but we have to start training black youth and women. And then to start working, how do we train the middle grouping in between? So I think that collaboration with your civil society, through co-ops, through community-based colleges and so forth, it's very, very important.
Sonwabile, I want you to come in here because merSETA, manufacturing, engineering and related services, must feed into the manufacturing which happens in the fashion industry. And perhaps you can share your experience?
My experience actually in terms of feeding the more the skilled craft, which is at this point in time our industry. What we have picked up in my experience, like I've said, that's why then we came up in terms of helping also the SETA in terms of delivering, because we identify some of these young and upcoming designers from the institutions of learning like your TVET, which is now it's called your FETs. Now, what we usually do, we go out there and look at their talent. And after we've seen these ones, they are better off than the other, we intervene by virtue of giving them some of the skill jobs that they have to do. From that, we award them and taking them to the next level, whereby we expose them to the market. After we have exposed them into the market, then we follow up with what we call mentorship. That mentorship is where we help them to start their own businesses. After they've started their own businesses, now we want to close that other gap, which is the industry. Because now this particular individual designer cannot even start his own factory. Then that particular person needs to be assisted, but somewhere along the line we found a lot of what it has been said, the bottleneck between some of the particular cities and also the business. This is what we call the collaboration that we need then to take place and make it a point that even the statistics that have been approved, where we have got a lot of the disabled people as well that are not entering now this kind of opportunity. We were discussing with one of my colleagues that, you know, there's a huge opportunity as well in terms of their own wear or garments that they're wearing. There is nobody who's catering that particular market. If a person is sitting on that particular chair, the clothes might be slippering. What is it that needs to be done in making it a point that we close the gaps that we do have? These are the kind of opportunities that we have within our country, but we are not capitalizing on.
Deputy Director General, I want to bring you back in here. I've just come back from Nigeria, where I hosted a presidential task team on education within that country. Now, South Africa is not the only economy on the continent battling with education. This is an African problem. One of the huge issues that Nigeria is grappling with is the quality of teachers as a result of the status of a teacher within that country. And I'd like to get your thoughts on the status of a teacher in South Africa, but surely that is at the heart of the quality of the education system.
Well, again, let me agree with the observation. We've started a number of initiatives to promote the status of the teaching profession. One such scheme is the National Teaching Awards. And it's a scheme that has been growing year to year. It has become even more popular than 10 years ago. But I think we need to do more. And how are we expected to do more? We need to use these teachers who come out with exceptional skills, knowledge, and experience to nurture the young teachers who come into the profession and afford them that responsibility and attach incentives to that. But I also want to come back to what the colleague raised earlier on in terms of the competency of teachers. There are two aspects to it. The first one is what we call your initial teacher education. I think there's a research, in fact, there's a large body of research in this regard, which shows that our teachers have not been properly trained to implement the objectives of the curriculum. Let me give an example. Very few teachers know how to train learners to read. Apart from the fact that our nation is it ranks very low in terms of reading. And I want to challenge Pearson. You know, there's been a discussion in the country around government going for one textbook and so on. The real challenge of this country is that we've got a poor culture of reading. I traveled from Cape Town this morning. I had 3 books with me I was trying to read to keep myself busy. I walked around to check how many people were reading in the plane. Very few. I think it's less than 1% of people were reading. I went to the US not long ago. I went to China. I mean, you get into their public space. People are reading. You get into the toilet. You find people, reading something. Now, I want to come back to the point that I made earlier on.
We're moving very quickly on from that image. Don't dwell on it.
Okay. The last point that I want to make is that I think there's some acknowledgement from HEIs, higher education institutions, that we need to review the way we've been training teachers. Our teachers are more qualified than they were 20 or even 25 years ago. But the competency level is very low. That's the first part. The second part, it's ongoing teacher development, which is our responsibility as a department and as a sector. It's also the responsibility of teacher unions. I'm happy to inform you that all teacher unions have established institutes which are intended to contribute towards teacher development. And I think we need to work together to make sure that we raise the competency level of our teachers to what it should be.
Veronica, you are nodding away while the Deputy Director General is speaking there. So with your 250,000 members, if you can perhaps share your thoughts on training and development of teachers and what unions are doing to take that further.
No, we are one of the first unions that established an institute. Only last year we trained almost 100,000 of teachers all over. And talking about collaboration, we want to thank the department also that they now ensure that there's money for ongoing professional development going to teacher unions, because it's easier for us to reach our members. It's easier for us to get our members on a Friday and on a Saturday. We last year embarked on training management and leadership in schools. Through research from our side, we realized principals don't know how to manage schools. They don't know how to manage the curriculum because they don't know what they must manage. And when they realize they don't know what they don't know, and you cannot blame them. So while we are doing interventions, we went into underperforming districts within the institute. We target Eastern Cape, the Labode underperforming district. We went to Limpopo, we are in the Mopani area with intense intervention in an underperforming district. We are now, this year we started in Mpumalanga, in an underperforming district, calling everybody in that district together to equip them properly. While people are getting ready to go on holiday, we are busy every weekend training teachers.
I want to go back to the theme here of education as an enabler for industrialization. But I want to unpack industrialization. Earlier, you alluded to the services sector and how we need to push the services sector as a driving force within the overall economy. So let's look at some of the stats. GDP 2013, 3.3%. This year we're looking at 2%. If we're lucky, I think most analysts are way below that as your GDP point. NDP looking for 5.5% on GDP. How important is, again, unpacking industrialization for us to achieve that objective?
Yeah, I have to say that in the debate on the economy, and I don't know why, but I sometimes call it the G word, the growth word, is treated as, when you speak about growth as an economist now in this country in many fora, they say, but you don't care about people. And that's not right. The debate that growth for growth's sake, that's a 1950s paradigm. Nobody talks about it that way anymore. For South Africa to grow sustainably, it has to include people. Otherwise, we can have spurts of growth, but there isn't a possibility of having year-on-year sustained growth.
And we can't absorb or reduce that unemployment rate of 25% if we don't see 5% and above.
That's right. So just as a rule of thumb, just to throw out at least one number, because I have to have at least one number thrown out. For every percentage growth in GDP, you can expect employment to grow by about 0.6. If that makes sense. So that's that's a rule of thumb that I use, and that's...
Just reiterate the number, because I think that's a very, very key stat.
So when GDP grows by 1%, employment grows by about 0.6 or 0.7 in this economy. If we grow by about 2%, just to give you a feeling for that, or 3%, we'll have an employment creation of about 200,000 jobs a year. And that's actually what we're seeing right now. We actually need to create 500,000 jobs a year, hence the 5% growth rate. Now, sometimes people will take us on and say, yeah, but how are we going to do that? But the point is that we need structural change. The country needs, the country, not the company. The country...
Well, it should be run like a company.
Yeah. We need to transform. We need to reach out. We have to be able to dream. the targets that we have are not unrealistic. We contain them to realistic targets, but then we've got to be reaching out and on some basic things like education, like energy. We contain our own growth. So while the global economy affects us, and as a small open economy as we are, we're deeply affected by global dynamics. But the reality is that there are so many things that are within our power to fix, that each time we fix one of those, for example, if energy were coming on stream, you can then approve property developments, you can approve mines. Those investments just can't happen, and therefore we don't know what the growth rate should have been because of that constraint. Just as an example, IT-enabled services is growing finally in South Africa, but I talked about in India creating 2 million jobs in a low-income economy. The major source of growth for IT-enabled services now is actually in an area where we're strong. It's business services and finance coming out of the United States. And despite the low global growth, that is still growing. And yet we're not doing anything forcefully to mine that opportunity. So there's so many examples of things that we could be doing to ratchet that growth rate up in a way that creates jobs. And that's what we have to keep provoking and pushing against to get those things done.
We also need to bring STEM skills into this conversation, Deputy Director General, being science, technology, engineering, and maths. There's a huge drive globally to invest in this arena because that is where jobs are being created, and we need to be able to supplement those arenas. Are we paying enough attention to this arena in South Africa, to STEM skills specifically?
Well, we are. We've started, we've increased our efforts. From a curriculum point of view, for instance, we've reviewed our curriculum. There was an earlier discussion which was also raised by Mr. Kodongwana to say we need more artisans in our country to participate in fueling the economy of the country. When we changed the curriculum in 2008, we became elitist. In other words, learners who could not perform at the high end of the cognitive level were left out. And many of those learners were then discouraged from participating in your technical subjects or your technology subjects. We've now reviewed our curriculum. We are preparing for implementing a curriculum which will encourage more and more learners to do your technical subjects. You know, the split internationally, it varies with about 10 to 20% of academic vis-a-vis vocational. It should be about 70 to 30%. 70 vocational and 30% academic. In our country, it's vice versa. And that's where we got the whole thing wrong. And I'm happy that at least the review of the curriculum, the working together between basic education and the Department of Higher Education and Training. And there's some very interesting discussions that are taking place also between higher education and basic education. There's a view to even say that we need to maybe consider taking TVETs to offer qualifications at your NQF level 5, which is almost like your old technicons. Because at the moment, your TVETs offer a qualification at the same level as your high schools. And they are not that attractive to your post-school learners. And these are some of the things that we are doing. And we believe that, in 3 to 5 years, we should be able to make a difference in terms of producing the requisite skills for the economy.
We're going to open to the audience at the moment, and we're looking forward to those burning questions that are going to come from you. But Raymond, I want to come back to the sector education and training authorities, the SADTUs. Are they listening to business? Picking up on the Deputy Director General's points, are they listening to business in terms of what skills are required to make graduates employable? Because surely that's one of the starting points as well.
I want to turn that around. It's actually that education should be listening to business. And SADTUs respond to that. Let me put it this way, that SADTUs are expected to correct what has gone wrong in education. And what we had, and I'm so happy that Hubert has acknowledged that what we do need in a review is not only, that's why I spoke of a sector provision or a skills provision review, not SADTU review as such only. You cannot expect to give a learner excelling in science, technology, and engineering and manufacturing at a later level when the basics are not in place. And that basics is your maths and science at an earlier level. What about innovation? What about research? We can't expect a learner at post-matric level to start picking up on research and innovation. That should be taught at school. So there's got to be a synergy. There's got to be, the system should speak to each other. So as a sector education and training authority, I think we need to look at the whole system, the whole schooling system, as well as the TVET system. We're the only country in the world, and the statistic that Hubert mentions there about 70-30, the Swiss system, 70% of a high-end economy is in technical training and 30% in academic training. We the other way. We've got about 600,000 learners currently at our TVET colleges and over 1.3 million at our universities. Don't reduce the universities. Start improving your TVET colleges. But you have to redress the curriculum. The curriculum is a problem. You cannot have a system. Let me just end up with this point. We have a system in this country, and I want to put it this way, that a kid finishes matric. Then we take him back to NQF level 2 or 3 in technical education. Another 3 to 4 years. And the point that Enoch made.
You should have left matric with those skills.
You should have left matric with those skills. There should be a portability of skills from one paradigm to the other. Then when that learner completes, he goes to a technical colleges, does high voltage theory only, no practical experience. It's a fight I have with the higher education department. You cannot enroll learners into a TVET college and he doesn't have the work experience exposure while studying. So what then happens, count the learning number, and go to the economy, Miriam, go and cost what it cost us to repeat education. It's 9 years to train an artisan in this country, especially if that artisan is black. So I really think we need to address that.
Powerful point being made there. We've got to touch on e-learning and how that potentially, when I talk about collaboration as a silver bullet, e-learning could also be the silver bullet to transforming the education landscape. Miriam, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, it's a great topic. South Africa's way behind on e-learning. We know the hype. We know there are a lot of public programs to hand out tablets, to hook up schools. You know, what you actually need is an ecosystem that doesn't help to put in pipes and it doesn't help to hand out tablets. You need an ecosystem which connects schools, has compelling content, Wi-Fi so people can practice at home, and you know, and devices. But the reality is we don't have a low-cost, high-quality, compelling ecosystem that is coming together. Now, what is happening, however, is the presidency has finally come together with education to be looking at how we roll out, I don't want to steal your thunder, but how we roll out education. Gauteng is a pilot for that, and there is a lot of dialogue to really look at how we improve that. But we've got to get spending focused on that and really think properly about how people will use the technology, and that's the big missing link that I have found globally. The challenge sometimes, though, is a question, can we afford it? You know, can we do it? The problem is that when we come back to the industrialization point, if we don't do it, most information going forward is going to be in the cloud. Most voice communication is dying. Most calls that you make, like on Skype right now, it's digital. So only 30% of the population is on broadband and has access to that. That means 70% are increasingly going to be falling behind the careers of the future, the opportunities of the future, citizenship, access to information. It is something that can't be overstated.
I want to borrow here from the World Economic Forum competitiveness report, which places Rwanda as one of the most competitive economies on the African continent. And to borrow from President Paul Kagame and to add to what Miriam Altman is saying, President Kagame has advocated 1 laptop per child. If I could go to the first question. Thank you very much, sir. If we could deploy a roving mic. Thank you.
My name is Tedza Dlamini, and I run one of the largest international exchange programs. We send about 1,000 young people overseas every year. My specific interest is in the internationalization of education. We live in the era of BRICS, and whether you call it the neo-colonial, with all these foreign powers coming into the continent, we have to be thinking about how our education is going to be supporting the Africa Rising story. And what I want to ask, both to DDG and most probably Mr. Sonwabile, is to look at what are we doing around the internationalization of our curriculum, issues of exchange programs, issues of benchmarking. Countries in the Scandinavian countries like Finland are doing really amazing things that we can sort of learn from to become a whole lot more competitive. So I feel the conversation needs to take one notch up. But practically at the level of industries like the fashion industry, where you've got AGOA in the US, the BPO industries where we really, in the services sector, we're relying on international clients, in terms of bringing jobs into those types of economies. I'm really interested, particularly with Sonwabile, because that's a very practical industry, fashion, we're exporting products. Why is it that Zara can come to South Africa and we're unable to create our own Zaras that we can take to New York? What's the impact of the education system in that conversation?
Thank you very much. I think valuable points made there, and looking at this internationalization of education. But I would respond to say to you, yes, we'll take the conversation a notch up, but we have to get the basics right. When it comes to education, we have to get the basics right. So Sonwabile, I'd like you to respond on the internationalization specifically, and perhaps alluding to the Zara point that was made by the gentleman.
I should think, actually, our country has been undermining and underpinning all the opportunities that we do have, and the craft and the talents that we do have. We look down to them. I concur with what he's saying, because I've traveled across even Europe and so forth in checking and also enhancing my craft as well with the international platform. What has happened is that in our country, we come from an old era whereby we have to undermine who we are. In that sense, now we are finding international people coming in and stealing our ideas, and they take them international, and then they bring it back. Now we can look at that particular fabric, we can look at that particular style of garment, but we know that it is ours, but it has got a different signature into it, because our education, our system has taught us anything that comes from international is the best. Then we become secondary classes in our own that we do have. I managed, okay, let me brag a little bit. I managed to come up with the Madiba shirts. When I started with the style with the former president, the late former president Nelson Mandela, by that time, I was known as a dressmaker back home and not given the platform that I do deserve. And guess what's happening even into that? What has happened? Because in our country, we don't embrace any of our art and craft and take it international and brag about it. What do we do? Now the very same, it's been taken by other people claiming that now they are the ones, but we have not yet even taken that product international, whilst it is an iconic brand. These are the kind of things that is happening. So I'm trying to echo to say our systems from education and from the skills, we are not selling enough of our skills international. We go in, I've been into exhibitions, but now you find that when you are in those exhibitions, there is no follow-up in terms of the manufacturing. To make it a point that this product now they've seen, they will ask one question: how many of these items can you produce in your country?
So Sonwabile, we're running out of time, but I want to take that point from you, is that we need to celebrate proudly South African and perhaps incorporate that into our education system, where that stance that international is not better comes through strongly within the South African education system. I'm going to take one more closing question, and then I'm going to move to closing comments from my panel. But one of my key tasks here today is not to just have a talk shop. It is about ascertaining 5 key points, one from each of my panelists, 5 key tangible points that we can put on the table. And I've now nominated this group of panelists as an education task team for South Africa. So while we take the final question, I'm going to ask you to think of your closing comments and for each of you to come forward with what you think is the most important point that we can tangibly execute on to make sure that education is a key underpin to the industrialization of South Africa, to creating a more competitive economy, one that can play on the global stage. So that is my task to you. Sir, you've got the final question.
Thank you. I am Brian Waforo. I'm the Executive Director for Learning Services at Pearson. The question is directed at the Deputy Director General for Education. I'm sorry I haven't asked you this question in our interaction, but it has been burning. I went through an education system that kept us in school from 7 in the morning to 5 or 5:30 in the evening. And the afternoons were dedicated to home economics, dressmaking, metalwork, building, agriculture. I don't need these skills to earn my living at Pearson, but I can build, I can weld, and I meet all my vegetable and poultry requirements of my household. You will understand how frustrated I feel when I give piecework to a failed matriculant who asks me whether potatoes grow on the potato tree or in the ground. Now, that may sound like a joke, but here are the practical economic ramifications of this. I spend a lot of time on the West Coast, and my neighbors are poor government land beneficiaries on the CASP program over weekends. They receive input from the government. But when I give their children, 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, unemployed, a lift to the next town, they will be going to Spar to buy potatoes and spinach. The question that I would like to ask is that, is there time in the school day where learners can be kept there instead of getting into all sorts of mischief to learn practical subjects that would make them more useful citizens? It's one thing to be unemployed and being able to do something with your
Brian,
hands.
thanks very much. Is there time in the school day for more practical learning, sir?
Well, at the moment, there isn't. There's been a very interesting discussion in the country about the length of the school day and whether, the 7 hours that we have is adequate for learners to be able to acquire all the skills and the knowledge that it's required. I mean, somebody talked about international benchmarking. Brian is right. I mean, in Zimbabwe, I think they've got a considerably long school day. If you compare with, with countries like in the Middle East and so on, learners stay longer and the curriculum is more varied and they acquire more skills than just your theoretical skills and so on. But what we are doing at the moment is that we're strengthening our curriculum to offer both the academic pathway, the technical or vocational pathway. Your technical pathway are your current technical subjects that we are offering, but we are increasing them so that we attract more learners, even those who are at the low end. Then we're bringing in something that was not there, which we call vocational occupational. Now, vocational occupational are your skills programs. And I'm sure the SETAs will be very happy that we bring this in. And this will help also to, to offer teaching and learning that will be able to afford learners who cannot cope with your high technical skills knowledge and your academic pathway, and then they'll be accommodated in your vocational occupational, which are your skills program. And I think quite a number of learners who have been dropping out of the system will then be absorbed from basic education by this curriculum that we are introducing.
Sonwabile, closing comments, sir.
My closing comment in my industry, I would say then that we need now to go back to the education and teach the business of fashion, so that some of our young and upcoming designers, they must understand this is not a glitz and glamour. They must get out there and start making money out of the craft that they've learned from the institutions of learning.
Raymond?
And we are there to assist.
I've got
Raymond?
5 points as you wanted, but I don't know whether you'll allow me. The first one is developing a skills development framework that's responsive to this country and to its economy. Secondly, develop a competency framework and testing toolkit for all learners and every person in the tertiary education institution. Know what your competency is. Thirdly, assessing our education system and looking at the partnership agreements, looking at partnership agreements that would function for the economy in the country. Lastly, or second last, having a collaboration between SADTU, education, and business to produce the correct learner. In other words, I think somebody mentioned recognition of prior learning throughout the system. And then very last, I want to look at, it's a point that somebody made, it's the career awareness. We're not doing enough career awareness. From cradle to graveyard. We just assume that people should work, and that's wrong.
Raymond, thank you for coming through with 5 points. However, so I'm going to throw it back at you. Which is your most important?
My most important one would be career awareness.
Veronica.
Very important.
Mine is, I have two key ones. I hope I've summarized.
Well, you know what's going to happen at the end, so choose the most important.
Because I've got 3 less than him. Mine is articulation. We talk about skills demand. Important for me is the articulation of what must happen in basic education with regards to the demand in the labor market. Very important one for me. The quality of education lies in the hands of quality teachers. So important for me is the ongoing professional development of teachers in this complex and sophisticated era that we are in. Education is no longer what it was those days. We are with e-books, we are in cyberspace. Challenges in education is different. So we need quality educators and we need them to be trained.
Is that your priority, quality educators?
Yes, yes.
Miriam.
I'm going to make an NDP type of statement which lifts up, which says, you know, the education sector is very complicated. We need to simplify this. In our diagnostic, just to raise the pressure, in our diagnostic, just to bring everybody back to that, we said 7% of children born in 1990, between 1990 and 1994, finished high school with the equivalent of a 50% pass. Should I say that one again?
I think, say it again.
Okay, 7% of children that were born between 1990 and 1994 finished high school around 2010 with the equivalent of a 50%. That means the probability of success in the system is so low that for not just your average person, but from the majority of the population, the odds are stacked against achieving the most basic education outcomes that we would expect. Many of those points have been raised, but if I can raise a sense of urgency, it means only 7% of people are making it through with even a minimum kind of capability as they come through high school. And that is a shocking statistic. That means we need to move because every single year we lose hundreds of thousands of children. So I'm going to raise a more general point, which is if I had my choice from an NPC perspective, I would say we need a massive drive around education, much as Korea did around, if I'm right, the 1970s with General Park, where it's a national campaign. Parents understand the basics of what's expected from their teachers, meaning teachers should be there. They should be on time. If they're going to workshops, they mustn't be in school time. Very basic things. Communication should go to parents so they know, is my child there? Where are they? You know, the technology is there now. They should be encouraged to participate because right now they're discouraged. So the number one idea is actually that it's a very high level idea, which is we need to come together in a campaign that mobilizes the nation around this issue, because we're not going anywhere if we don't start solving it immediately.
Collaboration.
No, it's more than just the point about collaboration, because behind the word of collaboration comes a lot of obfuscation about all sorts of wild and wonderful things that we're going to do. What we need is to get to that Korea General Park kind of campaign that says this is going to be our theme for the next 5 years. Many things government needs to do, there's no doubt about it. But this, if we don't start meaningfully moving the dial, not just in 1 percentage point each year, but meaningfully move that set of probabilities, no matter what socioeconomic class somebody is from, we're not going anywhere in any way as a country. Deputy Director General.
Well, let me start by saying I would really want to engage with the stats that Miriam has shared. And unfortunately, in the interest of time, I won't be able to do that. What I can also say is that we have improved our throughput rate from 28% to 43%. And I also indicated in my opening remarks that it's an improving system. We do accept that we need to do more to improve our throughput rate. But here are the points that I want to leave.
And you will highlight your most important at the end, of course.
Yes, the first one is civil society. The international experience seems to demonstrate the fact that education systems that succeed are driven from civil society point of view. Parents are part of what should be happening. Teachers are supported by the entire civil society. And the second point, it links up with what Veronica already indicated. I think the McKinsey group put together a report, and I think the main message of that report is that the quality of education is predicated on the quality of its teachers. We need to make a meaningful investment in our teachers, both from preset and inset, or initial and continuing teacher development. And the last one, which is the most important for me, reading, 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 reading. Not only for learners, but even for our nation. We are not a reading nation. Reading nations like Russia, Singapore, and others, their children do well in international tests. Part of the reason why our children are not doing well is that we are not a reading nation. They emulate us. Non-readers beget non-readers. Thank you.
On that note, we leave our education roundtable, reading, reading, reading. Thank you so much for joining us here on CNBC Africa. Thank you to my esteemed panelists, and thank you for the great audience interaction that we've had this afternoon.